address the needs of us altogether. I'm happy to restate the assurance I gave my right honourable friend previously that we will continue to engage closely with veterans groups across both Great Britain and Northern Ireland as we seek to bring legislation to address these important, complex and sensitive issues.
Mark Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After more than 4 years, 2 general election manifestos, a hand-signed promise in the Sun newspaper from the Prime Minister, the Secretary of State has delivered nothing. So my question is very straightforward. Where's your bill, Brandon?
Well, I appreciate this is something the honourable gentleman has campaigned on for a very long time and has been absolutely forthright in his determination to deliver for the veterans community on this issue. We actually did set out our command paper in July, just before the summer recess. We, as we said we would, have been engaging with interested parties on this over the course of the last couple of months, which of course is not just the veterans community but the victims and civic society and more widely the political parties in Northern Ireland. And we are still focused on delivering, as we said in that command paper, legislation before this House this autumn.
Sir Tony Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder, could the Secretary of State tell the House very clearly which groups representing the families of victims he's met who agreed with his proposals?
Well, look, I will just say, Mr. Speaker, as I've said before, we appreciate this is a very sensitive, very complex issue. As I said when I launched the command paper, this is an issue that will affect a huge range of people. We have had wide engagement across victims groups and with victims who are not represented by individual groups. That is the feedback that we are taking on at the moment, and we will come forward with proposals very soon.
Sir Atherton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent, Edward Vaughan-Jones's brother Robert, 2 para, died at Warren Point in 1979. 42 years later, the family's wounds have not healed due to repeated investigations and a lack of conclusion. Would my right honourable friend outline when Mr Vaughan-Jones will receive a conclusive report on the death of his brother so he can finally have some sense of closure?
Yes, and I would say to my honourable friend, my deepest sympathies obviously are with Mr Vaughan-Jones and indeed the many other families who have waited for far too long to get answers about the circumstances of their loved ones' deaths. We are absolutely determined as part of this process that information recovery will mean that families get answers to questions they have not had, they've waited far too long, and we need to resolve that issue soon.
Patricia Gibson.
Number 5, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many of the same supply chain issues experienced in Northern Ireland are seen across the United Kingdom. We are seeing a shortage of HGV drivers across all supply chains. The government has introduced a range of solutions to ease the pressures across the UK. We are separately in intensive discussions with the European Union to find solutions to the current issues that are being caused by how the protocol is being applied. And the haulage sector has been impacted, and we continue to engage the haulage sector to understand the issues they're facing to ensure that the work we do in the EU gets a resolution that works for them.
Patricia Gibson.
Speaker, Logistics UK, which represents 400 haulage operators in Northern Ireland, responsible for 90% of goods transfer across the Irish Sea, welcomed the proposals by the EU to improve the Northern Ireland Protocol as a leap of faith and a positive step. Why has the UK Government refused to accept these proposals and instead insists on sinking negotiations with ideological demands rather than practical considerations?
Well, again, I'm afraid I need to correct the honourable lady in her misunderstanding of the situation. I met with representatives of the Haulage Association on Friday who are very clear that as they're looking at the details of what the EU have proposed, they don't work. It's not enough. They are much more focused on what we outlined in the command paper. We do need to resolve these issues, and I am hopeful that in the conversation with the EU, will be, as they have moved, which we welcome, we'll be able to get enough movements to deal with those issues that are raised by the haulage industry, even on Friday of last week.
James Daly.
Speaker.
Minister.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 6, 12 and 13 together. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has been very clear that our levelling up ambitions are not about points on a compass, but people and communities throughout the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland. We are delivering for Northern Ireland through our plan for jobs, our £600 million City and Growth Deal programme, and through the New Deal for Northern Ireland, which will fund the promotion of Northern Ireland trade and investment globally.
James Daly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree it is vital that for all this government's support for enterprise, innovation and new investment in Northern Ireland, it must not be frustrated and deterred by a second and unnecessary layer of bureaucracy?
I entirely agree with my honourable friend. It is absolutely the legitimate interest of the United Kingdom government to deliver prosperity and opportunity for every part of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland, and we will work in partnership with others, including the Northern Ireland Executive, to do just that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I welcome the Minister back to the dispatch box. Would my right honourable friend agree that the £400 million that we are committing to implement the Northern Ireland New Deal will not only boost economic growth and competitiveness, but that taken together with other recent investment, it represents the largest boost from a UK government in decades?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right. On top of the £400 million New Deal funding, there's a swathe of other funding totalling just over £1 billion to support businesses and communities by delivering trader support, new technology and the Peace Plus programme. This is the largest investment by any government into Northern Ireland in decades, and it is warmly welcomed by businesses and communities in Northern Ireland.
Rob Roberts.
The Liverpool City region and Northern Ireland share broadly the same population at just over 1.5 million. Does my honourable friend agree with me that as Liverpool will be able to benefit from all of the economic benefits of a free port zone, there's no reason that we can't extend that across the whole of Northern Ireland and indeed across the whole of North Wales, so that we're not just limited to 45 kilometres and the whole of the UK can benefit from this excellent economic plan?
Mr. Speaker, I agree with the honourable member that free ports are a vital tool in the armoury to boost prosperity, trade and investment and to attract global investment. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, and I are working closely with the Executive and others to find the right free port model that will deliver for Northern Ireland.
Stephen Furry.
Mr. Speaker, the primary responsibility for job creation in Northern Ireland lies with the Executive, not the UK Government. So how can the Government justify their approach to the Shared Prosperity Fund, which takes away the spending power that the Executive previously had in relation to EU structural funds and centralises that and stops it doing any joint-up investment in skills or job creation?
What I would say to the honourable gentleman is the primary responsibility for job creation is private sector business. It's entrepreneurs. It's people who are creating products and selling them to customers. And what we are doing is making sure that businesses in Northern Ireland, as across the rest of the United Kingdom, have the tools to create the jobs and create wealth and prosperity across the whole of Northern Ireland.
Ian Paisley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister will know that sport is an economic driver. And he will also know of the bid for the WRC to take place in Northern Ireland next year. What encouragement can the Minister and the Northern Ireland Office give to ensure that that is a successful, proactive event that will lead to spin-offs and job creation?
I agree with the honourable gentleman. He has been a huge champion of this project. We are very well aware of the proposals that are being worked up. I understand the Executive and Tourism Northern Ireland are looking at them. And what I would say to the honourable gentleman is that they can come forward with proposals that will work. They will find a willing partner in the Northern Ireland office. What I say, I won't commit to how many of the wheels or what part of the vehicles we will pay for, but we will step up to help make this project a reality.
Stephen Bonner.
The director of the Northern Irish Retail Consortium has said that Northern Ireland has a unique opportunity to become a real hub of investment because it remains within the EU single market. So if access to the EU single market is a boon to Northern Ireland, and UK ministers have previously defended the protocol, have stated that it is, why is it the UK government decides such a best of both worlds situation to Scotland, where the people also voted to remain?
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister, the Secretary of State, Lord Frost and others have made it very clear that we need to refine how the systems are working in Northern Ireland. It is not working as we want it to work. It is impeding businesses and it is disrupting communities and trade. And that is what the government at all levels is busily engaged in finding a solution that works for Northern Ireland. I'm not sure that I'm going to take any lectures from the Scottish National Party about holding our United Kingdom together.
Chair of the Select Committee, Sam Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I welcome my right honourable friend and Dorset colleague to his place. If we are to see jobs created and investment attracted, I'm sure he will agree with me that political stability is a key element of that. Will he do all that he can to ensure that we have a fully functioning Stormont, working hard to improve the economic situation in Northern Ireland?
Mr. Speaker, I entirely agree with my honourable friend, the Chairman of the Northern Ireland Affairs Select Committee. That is why the Secretary of State and I were both at this box yesterday for report stage and third reading of the Northern Ireland Elections Bill, which is a vital tool agreed under New Decade, New Approach to provide enhanced stability to the institutions in Northern Ireland. But ultimately, Mr. Speaker, it is for the parties in Northern Ireland to work together to deliver for the people of Northern Ireland.
Toby Package.
Queue number 7, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Forgive me, Mr. Speaker. Number 7, the honourable member for Chesterfield. Mr. Speaker, we are moving to a high-wage, high-skilled economy, and the government is encouraging all sectors to rely increasingly on workers from the United Kingdom. But we have listened to the concerns of the sector. There are now 5,500 poultry workers eligible to enter the UK for work, on top of the 800 butchers who were already eligible to enter the UK for 6 months under the skilled worker route.
Well, it's all very well saying they're eligible to come in, but what the industry is telling us is that the ability of the industry to deliver the food that's needed for Christmas particularly is deeply jeopardised by the government's failure both on migration and on skills to ensure the workers that we need in our food processing industry are here. How can a government that so passionately advocates for Brexit be so ill-prepared to deliver it?
Mr. Speaker, the people, when they voted to leave the European Union, wanted us to level up the United Kingdom, to increase wages for the workforce, including, Mr. Speaker, by the way, the 60% of his Chesterfield constituents who voted to leave the European Union. We are taking opportunities of that, and I wish he would join with me in promoting Northern Ireland's vibrant agri and food sector. Companies like Kennedy Bacon and Bellis Dairies, who I visited in the last couple of weeks, are excited by the opportunities.
Many years, agriculture in Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK has been very dependent on overseas workers, even before the high levels of EU migration of recent years. So will the Minister do everything he can to make sure that agriculture in Northern Ireland can still access the overseas workers and the seasonal workers, which are so crucial to making sure that our food supply is resilient?
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend, the former Secretary of State, speaks with great authority on these matters. There has been extensive engagement with the sector. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, and I had engagements around the Balmoral show recently, and we have both visited businesses in this sector and are listening carefully to their concerns.
Question 8, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I continue to work closely with the whole of the Executive and the political party leaders on the issues that matter most to the people of Northern Ireland. The promise, obviously, of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement for devolved government locally accountable to the people of Northern Ireland must never be forgotten, and it is hugely important in making sure we deliver on the promise of a stable and genuinely cooperative executive built on respectful relationships and trust. That's where stability comes from, and that's what I hope to see continue in Northern Ireland.
Speaker, threats to collapse the Assembly hang over Northern Ireland, and the Secretary of State is sleepwalking towards a political crisis. Key safeguards have still not reached the statute books 22 months on. Northern Ireland simply cannot afford this. So will the Secretary of State fast-track the legislation through the House of Lords and commit to passing it in the coming weeks so that there is at least a caretaker executive in place?
Well, I would say to the Honourable Lady, obviously it was disappointing. I have to say in the summer when obviously we saw one of the political parties trying to bring down Stormont with various threats about what they were going to do. At the moment, I think it is important that we see stability at Stormont. We had the legislation. I'm sad she wasn't able to join us to speak on something she clearly cares about yesterday in the Chamber, and it is important that we see stability there, working with all the parties, making sure they're delivering for what people in Northern Ireland care about. That's got to be the main focus. The legislation that's going through the moment will help with that, but the way we keep stability in Stormont isn't around legislation here in Westminster. It's the political parties at Stormont focusing on working together to reform education, to reform healthcare, and issues like that that matter for the people of Northern Ireland.
Honourable Eastwood.
Name, please.
Mr. Speaker, the government is making good progress across its commitments under a New Decade, New Approach. As the honourable gentleman will know, only yesterday we were delivering on the Elections Bill, the Secretary of State and I, from this dispatch box, while he was enjoying his love-in with the member for North Antrim.
Honourable Eastwood.
Speaker,
very glad to welcome the Minister to the dispatch box. One of the commitments that you didn't mention there, Minister, was the commitment of this government to bring in a package of legislation around language and culture. When are you going to do it?
Mr. Speaker, the commitment of the government to bring forward that package remains undimmed. I wouldn't want to today deny the honourable gentleman his anticipation and excitement about revealing exactly when, but he won't have long to wait.
Shadow Minister Alex Davies-Jones.
Mr. Speaker, on another important commitment on abortion, we are clear that the cycle of inaction must end and welcome the Secretary of State's determination on this. But it is a serious matter that the legal obligations are still being ignored. So would the Minister confirm the report today in The Guardian that he intends to instruct trusts to commission services? Will that require primary legislation? And when will he act?
Mr. Speaker, as the honourable lady will know, the Secretary of State is leading on this, and I'm sure he'd be delighted to talk to her.
Order. I would now like to point out that the British Sign Language interpretation of proceedings for both Prime Minister's questions and the budget statement from the Chancellor of the Exchequer will be able to watch on Parliament Live. I think it's important that people who do have should be able to listen about what we're providing. And I will say again that the questions and for the budget statement from the Chancellor of the Exchequer will be available to watch on Parliament Live TV. We now come to the questions to the Prime Minister. Number one is Neil Hudson. Dr. Neil Hudson.
Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, during which my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, updated the Cabinet on how the government's plan for jobs is working, with higher wages, higher skills and rising productivity. He will make a statement to the House shortly, setting out how we will build a new age of optimism, Mr. Speaker. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Dr. Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I very much welcome the A66 Northern Trans-Pennine project from Penrith to Scotch Corner. This £1 billion investment will improve safety and congestion and help to level up our region, supporting jobs, essential services and tourism. But we have to get the project right. Will my right honourable friend ask his government departments for Transport, the Ministry of Defence and DEFRA to work together pragmatically and reasonably with suggested route amendments to ensure local communities such as Walcott, Musgrave and Sandford are not left blighted by these current plans?
Mr. Speaker, he's right that the development that he refers to is part of an infrastructure revolution I think will transform the country, but he's also right that we should consider local feedback from stakeholders and the community when finalising the design, and so we will.
Unfortunately, the Leader of the Opposition is isolating, so I'm calling Ed Miliband to ask the question on behalf of the Opposition. Ed Miliband.
Thank you. Just like the old day.
Just to say, I presume you all want to get onto the budget, because all you're doing is delaying it. Ed Miliband.
I just want to reassure both sides of the House it's one time only that I'm back. Mr. Speaker, we all need the vital COP26 summit in Glasgow to deliver next week, because failing to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees will have devastating consequences for our planet, and that is shared across this House. Does the Prime Minister agree that to keep that goal of 1.5 degrees alive, we need to roughly halve global emissions in this decisive decade?
Well, I welcome the right honourable gentleman to his place, and indeed, I think the whole House will extend our sympathies to the Leader of the Opposition. I hope he returns soon. It is, of course, correct, Mr. Speaker, that COP26 is both unbelievably important for our planet, but also very difficult, and it's in the balance. Mr. Speaker, and he's right in what he says about the need to keep 1.5 degrees alive, and that will be, and it does depend on what happens this decade. It depends on the commitments that are made. All I will say, Mr. Speaker, is that already very substantial commitments under the UK presidency designate of COP have been achieved, and we've moved from only 30% of the global economy committed to a net zero by the middle of the century to now 80%. And every day as I talk to international leaders, we hear further commitments to make those solid commitments that the world will need. Whether it is enough, Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid it is too early to say.
Mr. Speaker, I applaud the efforts of the UK presidency under the President-designate Starmer, but I do want to direct the Prime Minister's attention to the issue of this decade. I'll come to net zero targets for the middle of the century in a moment, but yesterday a very important report came out from the United Nations, which he will know, the UNEP emissions gap report. And on the eve of COP, it warned that far from halving global emissions this decade, we're only on course to reduce them by about 7.5%. Does the Prime Minister acknowledge, because this is crucial for what happens at Glasgow and after Glasgow, does the Prime Minister acknowledge how far away we are from the action required in this 10-year period?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, indeed I do, but I think what the House should also recognise is how far we have moved just in the space of a few years since the Paris COP summit of 2015, where, as I'm sure the right honourable gentleman will remember, the world agreed to net zero by 2100 by the end of the century, and agreed to try to restrain global warming by 4 degrees. We're now trying to keep alive the prospect of restricting that growth to 1.5 degrees. Every day, Mr. Speaker, countries are coming through with solid commitments on stopping the output of coal-fired power stations, reducing their use on internal combustion engines, planting millions of trees and investing hundreds of billions of pounds in the developing world. That is, those are solid commitments. Whether they're going to be enough, Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid it is still too early to say.
The band. Solid commitments. I just correct the Prime Minister on one point. It was the second half of this century set out in Paris, not 2100 for net zero. But here's the problem, Prime Minister, on this question of net zero targets for the middle of the century. It's easy to make promises for 30 years' time. It's much more difficult to act now. Australia has recently announced a 2050 net zero target, but its 2030 target would head the world towards approximately 4 degrees of global warming. Can I urge him? He mustn't shift the goalposts when it comes to Glasgow. It is about the emergency we face this decade. It's about the NDCs this decade. Please keep the focus on 2030, not 2050 and beyond.
The focus is certainly on 2030. We have 122 nationally determined contributions already. 17 out of 20 G20 countries have made NDCs, and the commitments are coming through. And he's right to say that we need to keep the pressure up. What you can't do, Mr. Speaker, is go in advance of what is truly practicable for the world economy and for what people can do. This government will go as fast as we possibly can. But it was Labour's plans, which I think he endorsed, were condemned by the GMB union for which their paymasters, Mr. Speaker, for meaning that they'd be confiscating people's cars by 2030, and families would be only allowed 1 airplane flight every 5 years, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, let me tell him. What this summit needs is statesmanship, not partisanship, which we just heard from the Prime Minister. He should not be trying to score party political points on such an important issue facing our country and our world. That's never the way I did PMQs. Now let me ask him. Let me ask him about the crucial issue of climate finance for developing countries, because the reason that the Paris summit succeeded was there was a coalition of vulnerable countries and developed countries that put pressure on all the big emitters, including China, including India. But the problem is that the world has not delivered on the $100 billion of finance promised more than a decade ago in Copenhagen. That the plan is to deliver it maybe in 2023. But I want to ask him about his actions. Hasn't it made it much harder to deliver on this promise? that we are the only G7 country to cut the aid budget in the run-up to this crucial summit.
Mr. Speaker, I thought we weren't going to have any partisan points. Didn't last long. Actually, the first thing I did, one of the first things I did as Prime Minister was to go out to my first UNGA as Prime Minister's UN General Assembly as Prime Minister and announce a huge £11.6 billion commitment from the UK to helping the developed world to tackle climate change. And I'm going to say to the right honourable, yes, of course it's true. And we haven't cut that. We have not cut that, Mr. Speaker. We're keeping that investment. We're keeping that investment. And let me tell the right honourable gentleman that this country is working flat out to ensure that we do reach the £100 billion commitment from the whole of the world. We're seeing the money come in from the United States, from the Italians, from the French, from the European Union, and it's quite right that it should. We have a way to go, Mr. Speaker. Whether we'll get there or not, I cannot say. It's in the balance. But the challenge is there for the leaders of the developed world, and I quite agree with the right honourable gentleman. They need to rise to it.
Speaker, it's one thing for him not to know what is in the Paris Agreement, but it's another for him not to know what's in his own budget. He has cut the aid budget. Of course he's cut the aid. Of course he's cut the aid budget. He's abandoned the bipartisan belief in the aid budget across both of these houses. But it's not just on aid, Mr. Speaker, where they face both ways. They've got a trade deal with Australia, where they've allowed them to drop their temperature commitments. They're telling others to power past coal while flirting with a new coal mine. And they're saying we've got to move beyond fossil fuels and opening the new Cambo oil field. Isn't the truth, Mr. Speaker, that the Prime Minister has undermined his own COP presidency by saying one thing and doing another?
Prime Minister. No, Mr. Speaker. And he's completely wrong. He's completely wrong in what he's. And I think he should withdraw what he's just said about the 11.6 billion. Because we remain absolutely committed to the 11.6 billion pounds that we're investing to tackle climate change around the world, and that is absolutely rock solid. And he talks about Australia, and I talked to the Prime Minister of Australia only recently, and Australia has just with great difficulty made the commitment to get to net zero by 2050. It's a great thing. And Mr. Speaker, I talked yesterday to our Indonesian friends, for instance, Joko Widodo, a good friend of this country, who's agreed on coal to bring forward the abolition of coal use in Indonesia to 2040, Mr. Speaker. A fantastic effort by the Indonesians. I talked to President Putin, I think it was yesterday, Mr. Speaker, and he confirmed his determination to get to net zero by the middle of the century. And that is what the UK is doing, working with countries around the world to get the outcome we want. It's still too early to say whether it will succeed, Mr. Speaker. It's in the balance.
The thing the Prime Minister has underestimated throughout these last 2 years is COP26 is not a glorified photo opportunity. It is a fragile and complex negotiation. And the problem is boosterism. The Prime Minister's boosterism won't cut carbon emissions in half. Photo opportunities won't cut carbon emissions in half. Can I just say to the Prime Minister, in these final days before COP26, we need more than warm words. Above all, Glasgow has got to be a summit of climate delivery, not climate delay.
Prime Minister! He talks about cutting CO2 in half. Well, that's virtually what this government has done, Mr. Speaker. Since 1990, we've cut CO2 by 44%, and the economy's grown by 78%. And that's our approach, Mr. Speaker, a sensible, pragmatic, conservative approach that cuts CO2, that tackles climate change, and that delivers high-wage, high-skilled jobs across this country. And our net zero plan, Mr. Speaker, will deliver 440,000 jobs. That's what the people of this country want to see, and that's what they're seeing. They're seeing wages up, they're seeing growth up, they're seeing productivity up under this government. And if we'd left it to the right honourable gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, who is sadly not in his place, we would still be in lockdown. But it's a point that he might bring to his attention wherever he is currently self-isolated.
Jane Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, the Prime Minister will know that both I and my honourable friend, the member for Wolverhampton South West, have lobbied for funding for better training and skills provision for young people in Wolverhampton. Our unemployment rate, youth unemployment, was unacceptably high pre-pandemic and now sadly is the highest rate nationally. Would the Prime Minister urgently look at how the government can level up opportunity so that young people in Wolverhampton can get the skills and the confidence they need to find work?
My honourable friend is absolutely right about Wolverhampton. That's why we're working flat out to ensure that young people in Wolverhampton benefit from the Kickstart scheme, and we are working with Wolverhampton Council to ensure that young people get bespoke support for their return to work.
We now come to the Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm sure the thoughts and prayers of the entire House will be with the family of Walter Smith, who sadly passed away yesterday, the legend that was the Rangers, Dundee United and Scotland manager, and many of us will not forget the day that he led us to victory over France at Hampden. Mr Speaker, naturally, most of today's focus and attention will turn to the Chancellor's budget after Prime Minister's question. But before we turn to domestic matters, I think it's right and important to raise the dire humanitarian situation that is developing in Afghanistan. The World Food Programme estimates that more than half the population, about 22.8 million people, face acute food insecurity. 3.2 million children under 5 could suffer acute malnutrition. Given the history of the last 20 years, it should be obvious that we have a deep responsibility to this country and to its people. Mr Speaker, they are dying and they need our help. It is only 2 months since the Allied forces relinquished control of the country. So can the Prime Minister update us on what exactly his government is doing to end the famine in Afghanistan?
I thank the right honourable gentleman, and he raises an issue that I know is on the minds of many people in this House and across the country. We're proud of what we've done to welcome people from Afghanistan, but we must do everything we can also to mitigate the consequences for the people of Afghanistan of the Taliban takeover. And so what we did, as you will recall, is we doubled our aid commitment for this year to £286 million, and we're working with the UN agencies and other NGOs to do everything we can to help the people of Afghanistan. What we can't do at the moment is write a completely blank cheque to the Taliban government, the Taliban authorities. We need to ensure that that country does not slip back into being a haven for terrorism and a narco state.
Mr Speaker, the fact is there is a humanitarian crisis and people are in need today. There is nothing there about tangible actions that the government is taking on the ground now, because the situation is getting worse by the day. In August, the Allies ran away from their responsibilities in Afghanistan, and now it very much feels like this government is washing its hands of the legacy that it left behind. Because not alone are the Afghan people being failed on humanitarian aid, promises made to them on resettlement are also being broken too. The Afghan Citizens Resettlement Scheme was announced on the 18th of August, which talked about resettling up to 20,000 in the coming years. But more than 2 months on, Mr Speaker, we've heard nothing. The Afghan people are being left with no updates and vague targets. So can the Prime Minister finally tell us when the resettlement scheme will open? Can he guarantee, Prime Minister, that 20,000 Afghans will be resettled, and when exactly is the deadline for that to happen?
Mr Speaker, we made a commitment to resettle 20,000 Afghans, in addition to those that we brought out under Operation Pitting, which I think most people, most fair-minded people in this country would think was a pretty remarkable feat by UK armed services. And many of them are, of those 15,000 are already being integrated into the UK, into schools, into communities, and we will help them in any way that we can. And one of the reasons, and I'm afraid he's completely wrong in his characterisation of the stance the UK has taken towards Afghanistan and the changes there. We continue to engage. We engage with the Taliban. This country was one of the first to reach out and begin a dialogue. And what we are insisting on is safe passage, Mr. Speaker. And what we are insisting, just to get to his point where he rather uncivilly calls out, what we are insisting on, Mr. Speaker, is that there is safe passage for those who wish to come and settle in this country, for people to whom we owe an obligation. And that is what we are doing, Mr. Speaker. And I have answered the question.
David Warburton.
Okay. Thank you. As the whole House will know, today is National Cheese Toasty Day. A massive, it's a fact, a massive 4.3 billion toasties were consumed last year. They are the nation's favourite snack. And glorious Somerset is the home of cheddar cheese. So with the news that Wyke Farms in my constituency is now producing what I think is the world's first entirely carbon-neutral cheddar cheese, did my right honourable friend know that eating cheddar from Somerset can reduce your cheese consumption carbon footprint by 55%? So will my right honourable friend support our vital dairy industry by committing to enjoying a carbon-neutral cheese toasty today?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my only question is, why is it only National Cheese Toasty Day? Why isn't it International Cheese Toasty Day? And I hope very much that amongst its many achievements, the COP26 summit will bring the entire global community to a better understanding of the Wyke Farms carbon-neutral cheese toasty.
So Geoffrey Donaldson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will be aware of the harm that the Northern Ireland Protocol is doing to the political and economic stability of Northern Ireland, and the very delicate constitutional balance created by the Belfast or Good Friday Agreement. In the command paper published by the Government in July, they committed to addressing these issues and recognised that the protocol is simply not sustainable. Does the Prime Minister accept that the conditions now exist to trigger Article 16 of the protocol in the event that the current negotiations with the EU fail to arrive at an acceptable outcome?
So we can negotiate.
The right honourable gentleman is completely right. I'm sad to say in what he says, and we're working hard to secure an agreement by negotiation, but we need to see real progress, because he knows the real life issues on the ground in Northern Ireland haven't gone away, and if we can't see progress, as we've been saying now for some months, if we can't see rapid progress in the way that we spelt out in our command paper, then I think that it's clear to everybody that the conditions for invoking Article 16 have already been met.
Robin Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Airedale Hospital in my constituency is made predominantly from aerated concrete, which is known for its structural deficiencies and is now in desperate need of a new rebuild. As the Prime Minister will be aware, the Airedale Hospital recently submitted its bid to government for a brand new carbon-neutral hospital. It is fantastic news that this Conservative government will deliver 48 new hospitals, but can I make an urgent plea to the Prime Minister that the Airedale is one of them?
Well, yes, Mr. Speaker, here with my honourable friend, we're hearing a little bit more. Indeed, the whole House will be hearing more about the spending for health in just a few moments. But I can tell him that we've received 120 applications for the biggest hospital building programme in a generation, and his application will certainly be amongst those who will get our most urgent consideration.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. This government is failing women and girls. From lack of rape prosecutions, no victims bill, to letting criminals off the hook. And now women and girls, including my own children, are being targeted with a sinister form of spiking through injections. It's always women and girls who pay the heaviest price. Now they are taking a stand today and saying enough is enough. So how many more women and girls will be hunted or excluded before the Prime Minister himself finally takes a stand.
Mr. Speaker, the reports of spiking are extremely disturbing, and as the honourable lady knows, it's already a criminal offence. And I know that the Home Secretary, my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, has asked the police to update her on exactly what details they have of what is happening. She wants to give them the space for the time being to conduct their inquiries into what's going on. But I would ask everybody with information about such incidents to come forward and contact their local police.
Morris.
With COP26 being imminent, I would like to draw attention to what good work's being done in Morecambe with the Eden project. Wes Johnson at Morecambe and Lancaster College has put forward a programme to teach youngsters in Morecambe the international Eden ethos to, shall we say, propagate the goodwill around the world. I'd like to invite the Prime Minister to come to Morecambe and come to the Morecambe Riviera to see the Eden project site at the earliest convenience. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted to respond in the affirmative, but to my honourable friend, because I think the last time he asked me about this, it was to ensure that we got an Eden project in Morecambe. So it sounds from what he's saying as though we're making progress in that direction, and that is thrilling.
Ben Bradshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the whole House will want to send my right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, our best wishes. And it's also good, Mr. Speaker, to see a few more Conservative MPs heeding the Health Secretary's plea and wearing masks in this chamber. But given we have had for several weeks now COVID infection, hospitalisation and death rates far, far higher than any other Western European country, was it a mistake to abandon all those precautions back in July? And if not, why are our figures so bad?
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, but the reality is that, of course, we monitor all the data very carefully every day, but we see nothing to suggest that we need to deviate from the plan that we've set out that began with the roadmap in February and that we are sticking to, that has given business and given this country to get on and achieve the unlockings that we've seen and indeed the fastest economic growth in the G7.
Jane Hunt.
Speaker, my Loughborough constituent Sophia Dady has composed a song about the positive action we can each take to combat climate change, which emphasises the need to clean, repair and protect. Will the Prime Minister join me in encouraging all UK schools to follow the lead of Fairfield Prep School in Loughborough and other schools across the world from Hawaii to Norway in raising awareness of this important issue through learning the song?
Well, yes, Mr. Speaker. Do I have to learn the song? I'll do my best, Mr. Speaker. And I thank my honourable friend for raising the work of her constituents and her constituent school. And it is absolutely vital that we not only recycle where it's sensible, but above all, we cut down on the use of plastics, Mr. Speaker.
Sarah Sultana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week it was revealed that fossil fuel companies, interest groups and climate denialists have donated £1.3 million to the Conservative Party and its MPs since 2019. So a simple question, no waffling or dodging the issue. On the eve of COP26, will the Prime Minister demonstrate that he is serious about tackling the climate emergency by paying back this money and pledging that his party will never again take money and donations from the fossil fuel companies that are burning our planet? Yes or no?
Mr. Speaker, all our donations are registered in the normal way, and I just remind her that the Labour Party's paymasters, the GMB, think Labour's policies mean that no families would have only to take one flight every 5 years, Mr. Speaker, and have their cars confiscated.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week it's UK Wind Week, and later this afternoon I'll be welcoming some young people from my constituency who see their futures in the renewable energy sector, which has done so much to level up the Grimsby, Cleethorpes and North East Lincolnshire area. Will the Prime Minister give an assurance that the government will continue to invest in the skills and development of our young people to benefit the regional renewable energy sector?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and I think the whole House should be proud of the fact that the UK now produces more offshore wind, still produces more offshore wind than not hot air.